All right, welcome. Hi, everybody. Today is June 19, 2020. I am Tijan Genco. I am a Master Certified Coach and Board Certified Health and Wellness Coach. I am also a coach educator and assessor. I have David Shen here with me. David is a fellow coach and has been one of my students for a while. And David is very creative and active. So he had some questions about the current events that he wanted to ask me during a mentor session. Then we decided to create a video about it and offer to everyone that might have similar questions as a resource. As anything, this is an offering. So take what makes sense for you and discard the rest. So I'm gonna be as humanly, as objectively as possible to answer David's questions. And David, do you wanna add anything?
No, it just seems so appropriate that these thoughts had come up, and really a thank you for this opportunity to kind of have a discussion about the recent events, because yeah, I think they're invoking a ton of feelings and reactions, and not only in ourselves, but in our clients too. So I thought it'd be very useful for us to have a discussion on, how might we show up as coaches during these times.
Okay, thank you. So David actually prepared some questions, so we're gonna have a dialogue about that. So do you wanna start, David?
Yeah. So, one of the things that has come up is I think a lot of us are wondering, are we racist? Mm-hmm. And it may not be immediately obvious to us. So where should us coaches begin to think about our own racism?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So thank you for that. And I think that the racism is an output of a process. So then the process is a judgment process. So then often we do a judgment process in order to identify the self, what is self and what is not the self. If you think about ego, and in order for us to understand what is me and what is not me, and the origination of this discrimination then gets back to that process of identifying what's me, what's not me. And with that then, if we are thinking that the human beings that are created to be in harmony with all life, then when we do the process of discrimination, and as a result of that, we alienate what's not me, then there is a problem in that process. When we discriminate to appreciate, oh, this is not me, and it's another thing and another being, and it's wonderful, and we can live in harmony with, then it's a functioning discrimination process. So then we need to look at the process of psychic injury in a way, right? There is the incorrection in the way we process, and that's generating discrimination towards race, towards ethnicity and religious group, or whatever it may be, or sexual preference, right? Then it can show up in many different ways. Then what we need to understand, how healthy is my process of judgment and discrimination as a human being. So that requires a little bit of shadow work, because often that when we identify things as us or as good, then we are keeping them in the forefront of the psyche. when we don't identify with something as not good or as not successful, as not whatever, then we push them into the shadow. So unless we are doing self-reflective process or a coaching or a therapy or whatever that brings that from the back in the shadow into the light, we will not know. So it will sit in the unconscious. And so if we then wanted to, as coaches, socially responsible human beings, we may need to take the self-work more seriously and sit to dig in what's in the shadow and go visit the Hades and back, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and that makes us not only very effective coaches, because the more self-work we do, we identify distortions in others as well, but also more socially sensitive, conscious, and harmonic beings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that sounds like a wonderful and necessary process. It sounds kind of involved. How would you go about exploring this for ourselves?
What I would do the first is that what is it that we are passionate about? That and then where do we feel it's completely despicable, unacceptable, right? And those things both are the responses of the passion. And often when we touch to the passion that also connects to the fear, then things tend to get out of the control and the nervous system is being hijacked. So I think the first thing is that what is it that I totally love, and then unfortunately that in this planet we do dualistic thinking often, that whatever we love, there is something that we're gonna think the other side of it that we don't like. So that's gonna be a way of creating inventory. And what is completely despicable and unacceptable, that's also gonna be an indication that work needs to be done there. Because the thing is that if the self-righteousness, right, if anything that gets into disharmony is the judgment to alienate, if that's the case, wherever we are disconnecting from compassion, that's an indication. Now, if somebody is harming somebody, and you certainly, your value structure says that's wrong, and you start to have negative feelings towards the one that doing the harm, then what distinguishes you from the one that doing the harm? It's same kind of a passionate negative force. So we need to understand, and unless we can stand by somebody harming somebody else, not necessarily allowing that to happen, but feel the same compassionate way that, my goodness, there may be some distortion somewhere, not to label it, but to understand how much they might be hurting somewhere or freaked out or whatever it is, then we have work to do. We need to sit somewhere and do our self-work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it seems like you talked about bringing things out of the shadow into the light. We talk a lot about just creating awareness in people. That seems like a very important part of the process. But then also, I think where you were mentioning about harming other people, it would also seem like the awareness that you're actually harming somebody when you didn't even think you were is super important too. Absolutely. And that's where this maybe hidden racism that's there, where you're just kind of walking through life, saying what you're saying, doing what you're doing. You're not really even realizing that even dropping these underhanded comments may actually be harming people along the way. Yeah.
And this is the thing that the most coaches know this, that there is a process of normalization. So that's when that means that when client brings out something and they feel not good about it, we say certain things to make it normal. Now, that's not only happening in a coaching session. There are normalization is being done at a higher level, the social level. Then it makes things okay for people to do. Especially then the people, when the people are in power doing things, and that becomes then, and the people associate that particular power with success or desirable qualities, with money, with success, with this. And if they're doing that, so I want to be like that, and therefore I need to do the same. So these are the things then gets into the social unconscious. And there are certain things that I see that cultural wounds across the globe that introduced by the capitalist cultures, that idea of scarcity, competition, that in order to be successful, I need to win. And if I need to win, somebody has to lose. So then this idea then generates automatic enemies. If I want to be successful, anybody else might have a same desire, has to be my enemy. This is sitting in our social unconscious. And corporate languages often uses win or lose and this and that, especially when corporations are doing very noble things like research and development in medicine. And they're speaking about another company to be needing to lose. I cannot comprehend that, because if we are trying to help human health, what makes it that if I need to win and somebody lose, let's collaborate and everybody wins, right? So there are certain social cognitive distortions that needs to be healed altogether. And all of us has to take part in that. And there are actually, scientists are now doing certain things like a Princeton University, measuring global consciousness with certain things, and the Great Brain takes part in that. There are some people working in it. Good news is that the more of us that choose the right thing, then the effects of that logarithmic, it exponentially affects and heals, so that the one healing word can affect others. So even if you're not gonna affect as a coach, do this in your sessions, just doing your own work in your own quiet place is still a very noble thing to do.
Wow, that's an incredibly hopeful and statement that you just made, that we, even in our work on ourselves, we can contribute in such a dramatic way to the global energy of this particular issue, right? And that we can affect it in such a positive way.
Absolutely.
So, and then also what you said was interesting, which was there's so much to unpack with stuff that we've grown up with and lived with for so long, and that we're broadcast every day from the media and all this stuff that's telling us this is the way to get ahead. This is the way to be better, stronger, faster, or whatever. Sounds like we need to really unwind all of that, this consciousness healing that you were referring to.
Yes, because that's then creates this fear, unnecessary fear. If I have to be successful and I am, I don't know, female, white, this, that, the other thing, social identifications, and then somebody else doesn't like me, then, oh, okay, I need to not like them because they're gonna come get whatever I have. So, and so we need to really stay alive. And whenever these offerings that comes from social unconscious, we need to choose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so here's an interesting way to look at it. It's sort of like asking like this. It's almost like, should we work on our own racist issues? And I guess I approach that question with, you know, how do we know if we even have them, and whether or not it's something that requires working on at this moment?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Maybe I'm not asking the quite right, but let me start here then. It'd be like, how do we even have the awareness that we should start down this path?
Yeah.
There's probably a lot of people, coaches or otherwise, who think, hey, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm okay, right? And well, others looking in from the outside may have a different opinion about that. But how do we get that awareness ourselves?
Absolutely. And the thing is that we are often desensitized, right? We need to come back to the sensitivities. That's what I was talking about, social normalization, right? So, and certain things you're going to be aware, and certain things you're not. For example, if you're quite flexible, it's not going to occur to you automatically that somebody inflexible cannot do the certain things you do. If you're always thin in your life, it's not going to occur to you that somebody overweight might have a problem to fitting in a chair or something like that, right? So then how do you get back to that sensitivity? Because we cannot sensitize ourselves to everything, every possible situation. This is now, that's almost getting into, oh, that's this group, that's that group. How do we include all this, that, and the everything? So I am, as I was introducing myself, I forgot to mention that I am mastery level trained complex problem solver and an engineer. So if you're adding more things to the equation to solve the problem, that's often an ineffective solution. So you need to then subtract back and look at the simplicity of it. Can I sensitize myself everything and do this for that and do this for that and whatnot? Probably not. And do we need to do it? Probably not. But the thing is that as long as we respond to every living existence, I don't want to discriminate now using the human beings, right? We also live in this planet with the trees and the plants and the animals and everything, with high levels of reverence and regard. Even if we accidentally do something wrong, energy behind it will be recognized and understood. Mm-hmm. And we will have a way of resolving that collectively, because we know how to communicate and we know how to course correct. Mm-hmm. But if we choose the way of ignorance, and unfortunately another psychic injury, I would say, is to pushing people to create the idea of business is good. And then you're running 100 miles an hour. There is no way that you can stay still and consciously choose. So then one wonders if this is an intentional, so that human beings don't choose anymore. And there are books around that too, that I will highly recommend to look into those things. So sensitivity, staying present as much as possible. Sensitivity are the key tools. Can we be aware of everybody else's differences? I don't know. It is unlikely, especially if you've grown up in a certain way. more protected in a certain environment, right? We become participant observer of a particular culture once we exit out of it. Otherwise, we're just participating without thinking. So yeah, so the distancing a little bit and meditative practices to stay aware and become observers of the things are helpful.
Mm-hmm. I don't know, do you think coaches should get race sensitivity training? The ICF and National Board had just put out statements about it. And, you know, some people are wondering, you know, should there be a stronger statement even saying, you know, in order to become a coach, you might want, you may have to take some sort of training. What's your thought on that?
I would say that part of my corporate career that I've been through a lot of trainings, and I can tell that micro inequities around unconscious bias, trainings around micro inequities and unconscious bias trainings are helpful because at least they create awareness about these things, the height, the weight, the race, the stat, and anything, grouping people, labeling people, right? And so there are so many years, so many people call this group a terrorist, this group a that, and this group a this. So it helps. So I recommend that sort of training, whether it's required by ICF or other, but idea is that the coaches, I see the coaching profession more of a passion to raise the human consciousness. And that's sort of why I called my company's training related section School of Consciousness and coaching. So then at least that if that's the passion, we need to, without a need to be enforced by another entity, we can choose to learn more about it. That will be my answer, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I would agree actually that it would seem a good part of coach training, right? As we increase our own awareness of things around us, but also within ourselves. Like one of the things that came to mind when you were talking about that was, as somebody was saying something, maybe a client, you might actually have an unknown racist thought, but at least you can kind of be aware of, oh, wait, I feel uncomfortable here. Why is that, right? Or I feel threatened, or I feel afraid or something. And these are things that would help you raise your consciousness about yourself, right? to know maybe that you should get more coaching in this area or not.
Absolutely. And I can share with you that ACTO, Association of Coach Training Organizations, just had a conference and we were discussing about how to incorporate certain training modules into the coach trainings and spread that across the coach training organizations.
Mm-hmm. Good. Switching gears a little bit, we are out here now. We could start work on ourselves and things, but you know, we have clients now, and we're wondering what we might do in certain cases, given that there are current events happening. First, you know, with the virus and stuff, and we were coaching around those things. And I think we're only 3 or 4 weeks into the protest. It seems like so much longer, but it hasn't been that long. But I'm sure if they haven't already, very soon clients will present with something that's related to protests, race, and the riots. So I'll start here with, you know, what if somebody wants to discuss their white, black police issues? I mean, do you have any thoughts or tips on how to handle that conversation like that?
Absolutely. Like any coach conversation, that we need to make the conversation not at the content itself, but the client's relationship to the content. So as long as you keep the conversation at the blueprint of the psyche, what's the relationship, what's bring this forward, what is the need, then you can actually do a successful coaching session without exposing itself to the passionate emotions around things, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it would almost be, well, I guess it would probably be in line with some of the work that you've been doing with us in figuring out how, as we as non-clinicians can still coach very deep emotions and potentially even trauma areas, but not get ourselves into areas where we're not trained for, or it's not appropriate for us to be there.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed very similar to that, where, yeah, we can touch the trauma, we can touch the white-black police issue, but we can pull back effectively to address it without pulling them deeper into places that we can't pull them out of.
Yeah, because if the client says, I am angry, I'm fearful about this is happening, and if you get into more, tell me more about that. It's a question that, you know, I will tell all my students to never get into, then it's going to get client more into the drama part of the experience. But what we want to do is to create detachment from it, bring the client to a place of observation, and then look to see where is the hero's journey, what needs to change for a client to feel more empowered about it, instead of feeling disempowered about this, or whatever that they're looking to resolve to, right? So what about this requiring shift? What about this requiring change that I don't even need to use the language to get into it, but looking to see what is not in alignment with the human being. So there, that a lot of healing can occur.
Yeah, this is areas where I know a bunch of us have spent months with you on fine-tuning that part of it. Yeah, what if someone shows up with racial opinions different than ours, and somehow we find something welling up inside us? Do you have any comments on what could happen in those situations?
Yeah, absolutely. Like anything, right? Know thyself. The first of all, as a coach, we really need to understand what are my core values. I would recommend that no matter what the situation is, know yourself, know what is your business about, what kind of clients you're willing to take in, what kind of clients you're not willing to take in, right? And then, what's the price of your soul? Knowing you, David, I can say to you that it may be easier for you to turn down a racist client if they are willing to pay you the regular rate. But what if that is a Fortune 50 company CIO coming to you with the promise of 2 years of a contract, coaching whatever many people, wanting to offer you $750 an hour? What happens to you then? Right? So this is when we get to look at our shadow. So you gotta know who you are, and what gets you out of your core values. When do I get to negotiate my soul? And so that's important to know. And I recommend either do that with the self-work yourselves or with a mentor or something. Establishing business requires that sort of, especially in our kind of, any business is important to understand values, but in ours, we're touching human lives. It's even more important to know what's okay, what's not okay. So having discussions as much as possible in the initial chemistry session to see if this is a match or not is an important step. Let's say you have done your due diligence, you know your soul is not for sale. Your clients seem to be okay. And then all of a sudden they change, right? Something happened, then boom, their individual unconscious just came to animate itself, and weird stuff happening. Most professional thing to say, I'm sorry, this is getting out of, not in alignment with my value structure. I'm sorry, I need to end this session. And if it was me, I would have even reimbursed the session. But it depends on the coach's preference. That's all right. Stay professional, and the contract or your relationship or particular session, even let's say it's not at the level that you need to end a contract, but it's animating so many things inside of you to say, I'm sorry, right now I'm finding myself not being able to listen to you. Something triggered and I need to step out. That's part of the coach's self-care and ethics that we teach, right? So knowing that what gets you off and being able to communicate and knowing that's not going to make you less. And if in the long run, it will help you to honor you. And because if you're dismissing yourself, that's also going to affect your ability to coach anyway. So those are important things that I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, it's funny. The image as you were talking about this that came to mind was my wallet turning black and bursting into flame in my back pocket.
Yeah.
How can I coach with my butt on fire? It's, I think of a lot of us new coaches, new to the business coaches, you know, we're coaching along people, and we were coaching in a time when there weren't obvious protests and unrest and everything. And everybody just seemed like, oh, this just seemed like an average person. Yeah, but what if all of a sudden somebody shoots in there? As a question I had thought come to mind, it's like, oh, I'm thinking of joining the, white hate group or the KKK, tomorrow. What do you think? And I'm like, what do you do? When all of a sudden it pops up when everything else seemed really fine.
Yeah.
I mean, part of it is you're saying, oh, wow, my values just got thrown in my face like a pie, kind of thing. And maybe I got to just say no. But I can also see where it could be really difficult too, where everything seemed normal and fine. And then all of a sudden, for whatever the trigger was, whether it's current events or something else, boom, something pops in there. Potentially even literally at the red flag level. I don't know, maybe we could talk a little about that too. It's like, what level is a race issue, potentially a red flag issue? But anyway, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the thing is that you don't have to hate chocolate to like vanilla. And in our coaching session, as I was saying in the beginning, that we cannot judge. What we need to do is honor. This is that another person's life. And of course, we cannot say that it's okay to harm somebody else. But we need to honor everybody's choices, what they're deciding to do with their life. And that's another choice. Is that a good choice, bad choice? We wouldn't know. I'm not at that level, but it seems to be harmful from the human domain, right? And so in this session, then, we need to carry the professionalism without making the other person wrong. We need to just find a way to decide what's right and what's correct for us, for our value structure, and what we want to do. And of course, you can, again, use the coaching conversation and questions, what makes you want to do that kind of thing, and help to raise the consciousness if the client is open and willing. But if they're not open and willing and they make their mind already, I don't think they're going to come to a coaching conversation about it. And of course, then if something comes and they are sharing with you that they're going to hurt themselves or someone else, then it gets into the ethics and informing or referring, right? This seems to be beyond my level. I think it's better if you're willing to go talk to this therapist or, clinical psychologist, whatever needs to be done. But
Yeah.
of course that, and maybe we need to inform some other social forces if that discussion coming to that level. But in anything that desperation makes us do the wrong things. You may be a new coach or seasoned coach and running low in clients and so on. We need to understand and not grab on things with the idea of scarcity to continue to select and do the right thing with everything we do so that we don't find ourselves in that sort of a challenging situations.
Yeah. And before I move on to the nice case where maybe someone presents and says, oh, I want to change, right? Whatever it was I had. Some coaches had actually asked me this interesting question, which is, what's our responsibility almost to, when we see this, that if society says this should be this way, that we may want to encourage change in that direction? So it'd be like, well, Black Lives Matter. So maybe we would want to work with this person to understand that and maybe get on board, maybe is the ultimate goal, right? Now that also sparks in me coach agenda, and also whether or not it's really honoring the client and whether we're imposing our own values on them. And but I sense there's maybe some more global responsibility for some things. So what's your thinking on that?
The thing is that compassion is compassion. It can express itself towards a race, it can express itself towards a gender or whatever. So that as long as you work at the client to raise their energy and separate from the fear into the levels of compassion and understanding, the thing is going to automatically resolve itself. And because the client's consciousness is going to be higher level, they're going to start to question certain things. So this is why that I say that we do this quietly, because we have the secret sauce. We can awaken one mind at a time to do the cultural renaissance without really getting into, well, what about this? It's not necessarily hidden agenda, but if you are working with the client and awakening them every session to the level of compassion and caring and mercy and understanding, that's where the resolution and healing occurs in any kind of content, then it is contagious. It's going to go back and find the truth anyway, because we are born with that truth embedded in us, that our socialization process distorts our thinking. So once we taste the truth, we won't go back to the untruth. It will be harder to go back. Yeah.
And so perhaps then what you're saying is, if we stay true to our coaching competencies and our values, then some of the correct directional things we would like to see happen in our clients is going to happen on their own. Yes. Without us saying explicitly, hey, it's all about white people or Black people or whatever it is. Yeah.
Absolutely. And this is the thing that they are now, the scientists can measure, right? If somebody walks into a room that there is a chaos with a lot of positive energy, automatically room changes. Even if you're just working on your consciousness, the client is going to come to your session, start thinking like you.
Oh, that's frightening.
Right? They're automatically going to be influenced by your integrity. This is why we say that do the work, do your self-work, because we need to be example, not to lead by acting, but also being. That's now the competencies are updated to more emphasize coaching mindset.
Mm-hmm.
that just
Mm-hmm.
being, we can influence. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that thought. And maybe now it's kind of segging into hope, right? A client that actually is now moving towards positive change. Um, you and I, we had, in your sessions, we've talked a lot about time. I was curious about, let's say we have a client, great, they seem to be on the path. What kind of expectations should we have in terms of how long this might take, either within a session or across sessions? Any thoughts on that?
My experience is, it can be different, right? This is why that I teach often that how ready and willing are you to make the change? Now, sometimes people are willing, but not ready.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that environment is ready and they're not willing, and a lot of things affects. And the thing is that there is constant social reinforcement of the distortion. So the environmental contamination is very real, right? We say that if somebody, for example, wanting to quit smoking, we then want to have them encourage them or have a dialogue about making changes in their environment so that they don't see the triggers anymore, so they can sustain the change. So we need to consider all that is there. And sometimes that change can occur, and sustainable change. It also depends on coach's mastery. If you go deep enough and completely recover the truth, in one session they won't go back. But if you're doing gradual change, it may require more reinforcement and time. And also, there is a thing called shadow loyalty. If somebody in a family changes their thoughts, but then everybody else in the family carrying forward the thought, they can feel like, do I belong? Where do I belong now? What happens? I belong to here, and if I change myself, what's going to happen to me? So it changes the client's value structure and meaning of life. So those things carry deeper conversations and more than one session. So any behavior change, we say that in general takes about 3 to 6 months reinforced conversations, because unlearning is require more effort than learning. And then it depends on how much reinforcement is being done while you're unlearning, and how much strength and stamina, self-confidence that person has. So these are all, I'm not giving you a direct answer, but I can tell you from one session to 6 to 9 months, this can come up in different ways. And often if you strip about what context this is occurring, what's really happening in this world right now is that we have this idea that I am separate than anyone else. I am so special and very separate. With the globalization, we're recognizing, oh, well, that's not true. The virus, a tiny unseeable thing in China, can affect my life right now. So that's not true. Then how do I come up with that? And we also learned so many years, we thought, at least within the US, oh, we're so far away, we're so this and that. So we're separate, and we're figuring out we're not separate. Mm-hmm. And so then we decided, okay, if it's not me, somebody doesn't look like me, that's going to affect me, and so on. So we need to come to terms with all those things that needs to change archetypally. The thought patterning needs to change for this to stay. So we need to really get into the individual's thought patterning as well as their relationship to the collective thought patterning. if I'm being a little bit challenging to the people who are not with me as much as David now, I have a blog in my website that talks about expiring certain behaviors that might be helpful. Was that clear or not, David?
Well, I understand you because I've been with you for so long, but as you say, new viewers may have a hard time.
Well, then we'll invite them to the sessions.
Yeah, love to see him. Definitely, sure, for sure. Following on this time aspect, there was something that has been really fascinating to me about all this stuff. And it started with racial issues, but I think it has to do with all trauma. It's the inherited trauma that can come from, geez, since the dawn of time, right?
Yeah.
Not back centuries into history, generations upon generations. And it's burned into our DNA. I mean, literally, we are born and not experiencing anything in life, in the world yet, but yet already programmed in a certain way based on how our ancestors were treated, the trauma they have felt or not felt. And there's a lot of literature now and talks about how to address these. And I find it fascinating, and especially if the client's willing into, but I am concerned that at least as somewhat new coaches, we don't have necessarily training to do it. But what tips can you offer us to work in this area, even if we aren't specifically trained in it? And maybe where can we find some training in this? How might we approach it if we're interested?
Yeah, there are researchers, obviously the esoteric knowledge carried that, but now the scientists are doing tests. Unfortunately, they're using lab animals to do it. Because of the shorter lifespan, there are tests are done in mice that they introduced the mice with the cherry smell and then shock them in some way. So then the grandchildren smelled the cherry smell and there was no shock, but they felt the stress. So, and then they were treated with positive enforcement, the cherry smell and positive environment. That next generation, it disappeared. This is why I'm saying compassion, understanding, and all that. So at least we can actually use very simple scientific experiment like that with the client to raise the awareness. And then to see if how they feel, if it resonates with them, to see somebody who's trained on this to look into that further. There are different techniques and methodologies are being used around that. One of them is to family constellations and inherited family trauma. Mark Wallen in the US has publications around that, and he offers training. And like I said, there are different aspects that looks into that. Soul retrievals in the shamanic traditions, and certain Barbara Ann Brennan, she looks at it from an energetic perspective, completely does energy healing. So there are certain things that requires dialogue, certain things that requires energetic healing. There are different modalities, whatever that coach, if they familiarize themselves with that, then they can have a dialogue about how much client knows and how much they are open to it and create awareness that way. But and also coaches can expand their knowledge from taking additional training to have a dialogue or add to their service portfolio, whether it's energetics or more into utilizing the therapeutic applications into coaching, not necessarily doing the therapy of it, but using it, like most of our evidence-based methods that comes from that. So they can be equipped with that. Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be great if you could post some of those names and resources alongside this video when we're done. So I think as time goes on, we'll probably see more use and more situations where we'll need this kind of thinking and training, and so it can be, you know, more helpful for our clients
and to
getting done.
ourselves, right?
And to ourselves.
We don't know what's back in there in our
No, it's kind of
shadow.
scary.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what really makes me hopeful is just the fact that one person can have exponential effect on global change. We just need to do the work ourselves, and wow, it can be additive to the world. That's pretty encouraging.
Absolutely. And those of you who are watching this, if you carry more scientific mind, you can see that there are certain experiments done that people, including Greg Braden, has publications around that. They collectively meditated, and then there is a measurement or reduction of crime in New York and others, that when you're, projection of positive thought. And if you want to look at it scientifically that way, it's helpful. But the other day I was participating in an ICF effort, and they were asking us, how do we want to identify ourselves with one word? And I said, I'm a harmonizer. So we want to bring people back into the harmony, authenticity, and how they were created by divine design, you know, so that we don't carry this distortive thought thinking anymore.
Yeah. Well, that's all I had. Thanks very much for having this conversation with me regarding all these current events on protests, riots, racial issues. Really appreciate it. And hopefully it's useful to our coach community out there.
Thank you so much for preparing it and initiating it, and I appreciate it. And then we'll share this with you, and hope that whomever is going to view finds some value. Take care.